Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today, I should warn you today that this video is likely to make you extremely angry, in fact positively incensed. So if you're in a good mood right now, you might want to watch something else and maybe come back to this later on, because there's a lot to be really, really angry about. Before I start though, if I could just briefly say thank you very much indeed to everybody who was kind enough to buy one of my hats last week. There's still plenty available. They're perfect for the march next week, and also ideal for if you have any friends, neighbours or relatives who still think Brexit was a good idea. It's a good way of annoying them by wearing one of these hats. They're available from my website ml44.com, and I'll leave a link down below. But thanks again to all those who bought one. Now, it seems to me that right now we've got three massive threats facing us all, and by far the biggest is global warming, and I'm not sure we're doing anything like enough to stop or even begin to reverse it. And I think an awful lot of people do. Things are just going too fast, and we're seeing all these freak weather events and so on, and the consequences, I think, are going to be really, really serious. Second big threat is AI. I think AI threatens to take over so many jobs. In fact, it's difficult to think of many jobs that AI will not be able to do, which leads one to wonder, well, what are we going to be doing in 50 years' time? Not that I'll be here to have to worry about that then. But the third threat that faces us all, which is the one I want to talk about today, because I think this is really, really serious. It's almost a cancer, and that is greed and inequality. It's the ways we see in this country, we see all over the world really, we see particularly in this country how a very small group of people are just gathering immense wealth whilst everybody else is struggling. You know, we're all paying for it, and it's really so rotten. And it's so senseless. I mean, what is the point? You know, if you've got a few hundred million, I mean, why do you have to keep gathering more and more money? And because politicians hobnob with wealthy people, and wealthy people like to hobnob with politicians because they want to get favours out of them and so on, this is something that is not going to change, I don't think. Unless we have a government that really takes it seriously and really addresses it seriously. Now, I did want to give you some examples, the sort of things that I personally find quite outrageous of how wealthy people are getting wealthier and guarding their wealth. Take, for example, Lord Rothermere. He's worth 1.6 billion. He owns the Daily Mail. He doesn't pay a penny tax in the UK because he lives in France. He's got a big house in England, but no, he spends most of his time in France, and so he doesn't pay any tax here. The Daily Mail, whatever profits they make, they don't pay any tax here because they're based in Bermuda. So here's this huge newspaper which is very influential. Lots and lots of people persuaded to vote to leave because of the Daily Mail, and it doesn't bring a penny of tax to the UK. Take, for example, we probably all saw last week, Sugar, Lord Sugar. He's worth 1.04 billion, a lot of money. He tried to become a non-dom in order to avoid paying tax, £186 million in tax. If you've got 1.04 billion, why are you trying to avoid paying a bit of tax, paying a little bit back? Quite extraordinary. He was turned down because being a member of the House of Lords, he couldn't claim to be a non-dom. Take, for example, Jim Ratcliffe. He's the guy who owns a very big chemical company. He's the second richest man in the country, apparently, worth 30 billion. He didn't want to pay any tax. He's made 30 billion from scratch, I believe. He didn't want to pay any tax, and so to avoid tax, he moved to Monaco and saved 4 billion in tax. I mean, do you think that's right? His businesses are still operating in the UK. I'm sure they operate in all sorts of countries, but it's still based in the UK. Take this one, for example, the chief executive of Tesco, a guy called Ken Murphy. His salary is 4.4 million. Last year it was 4.75 million. That's approximately 200 times the wages of the average Tesco employee. How much tax do you think he paid in the UK? None, not a penny. Because, you see, he's registered for tax purposes in Ireland, where the tax rates are lower. So he pays less tax by being an Irish resident living in England. Look at Sunak's wife. All those years she was a non-dom, wasn't she, avoiding millions and millions in taxes, whilst her husband was the Chancellor of Exchequer, no doubt advising her to remain a non-dom as long as they could get away with it. And then she got caught. She just given $3 million to a school in California, where presumably her children are going to go when Sunak gets chucked out and they have to run away. Nadim Zahawi, as Chancellor of Exchequer, he suddenly realised that he'd inadvertently forgotten to pay £3.5 million in taxes. See? It's easy to do. You forget to pay £100 in tax, they'll be all over you. You'll be in court in 10 minutes. He forgot $3.5 million. And the rich are paying, on average, around 21% in taxes, whereas for most other people it's 38%. Is that right? Is that fair? Is it fair that all these people are able to employ very expensive and clever lawyers to find ways of not paying tax? I mean, if you are fortunate enough to have become very successful, made a lot of money, isn't it right? Isn't it morally right? I mean, how do these people sleep at night? Isn't it right that you should pay a bit back? Especially as now, when everybody else is suffering so much, when so many people are in such dire straits. And I think one of the problems actually is these rich lists, because I think a lot of these rich people, they're so worried about dropping down on the rich list, they want to be as high up as they possibly can, and if they pay tax, that's going to reduce their wealth. But it's really, really, really bad, and then of course you've got all the the government corruption. I mean, take for example the famous Michelle Mone. She made an absolute fortune simply because she had a Michael Gove's telephone number. She pestered him, and then supplied millions and millions of pounds worth of PPE. She'd never had any experience in dealing with PPE before. A lot of what she supplied was completely faulty and unsuitable, unusable, and is all being destroyed. She got paid. She's got she's swanning around Mayfair now. She's got a private plane. We paid for it. Private yacht. We paid for that as well. Living the life of Riley. And of course, it's been recently announced that they're not going to be pursued. Any of these people who got away with £14.9 billion worth of Duff PPE, not going to be pursued. No. Instead, we are going to have to pay money. We are paying it now for this useless PPE, which cost billions to be stored until it can be incinerated. Is that right? And nobody who supplied this stuff is going to be prosecuted. And at the time of the pandemic, when it started, there were plenty of companies in this country who could supply PPE, who had experience of supplying PPE, who had contacts and sources in the Far East, and they were all ignored, turned away. Instead, friends of Tories, Michelle Mone, was she in lingerie or something, and the people who the pet company and the design company and the company doing fashions and the company doing road transport, they were all given these huge contracts. They all jumped on the internet and ordered this stuff, not knowing the first thing about it. And that's all down to us, 14.9 billion. And then you hear things like, for example, last week it was revealed that Gillian Keegan, who's this week's Secretary of State for Education, schools are falling down. We all know about that. Risk to children. It's going to cost fortunes to put these schools right. There's been opportunities in the past, but they've decided not to save money. Turns out we, it's you and me, we're spending £32 million to decorate her office. I mean, I know prices have gone up in B&Q, but I mean, 32 million to decorate somebody's offices. I mean, it's outrageous. You know, it just demonstrates the contempt these people have for us. This is our money. Look at the bounce-back loans. I mentioned bounce-back loans last week. This is a scheme that Sunak came up with. And frankly, all you had to do was to go onto the government website at the time, and you had to put in the name of a company, and you had to put in your last year's turnover, and you could then claim 20% loan to the value of 20% of your previous year's turnover. But nobody checked your previous year's turnover. And so what lots and lots and lots and lots of people did was to just form companies, go on the website, say they'd done 250,000 the previous year when they hadn't done anything at all because the company didn't exist the previous year, and claim the 20%. They got £50,000 straight in their bank account. One guy, he was reported in Private Eye, formed 20 companies, claimed a £50,000 loan for each one, £1 million in loans. They're not going to be chased. No, they decided to write that off. 7 billion, our money. This guy with the 20 companies is now running a chain of shops all over the country in prominent positions in high streets all over the country. Scot-free. Look at Test and Trace, 20 billion. Much of it went to consultants, people being consulted from people from the big accountancy companies. What accountancy companies know about testing and tracing, who knows? But 20 billion, our money, poof, gone. Look at Sunak failing to insure against interest rates going up. They cost us 11 billion. Truss and Kwarteng, 74 billion. Their little afternoon out at the dispatch box. Kwarteng's budget cost us. You know, these are staggering amounts of money. You know, just that list I've gone through is probably over 100 billion. And at the same time, we're being told all the time, can't afford this, can't afford that, can't afford anything. Cuts. We've got to cut even more because before the election, what they have to do in order to get re-elected is have to cut taxes. And there isn't much more to cut. So, excuse me, what seems likely is that they're going to go after pensioners, the triple lock. Let me tell you about pensions in this country. The state pension is about £141 a week. Now that is said to be 29% of the average UK wage. In the whole of the OECD, that's all the 20 or 30 most advanced countries. The average state pension is 62.9% of the average wage. In other words, our state pensions are less than half the average of all countries in the OECD. The lowest of all. I want to cut that so they can give some bribes to get re-elected. And Sunak says, he's always saying it, isn't he? He says he's focused on delivering for the British people. And just look what this little idiot's delivering. Highest prices of food, fuel, energy, gas, electricity, highest water charges, whilst the water companies are all have taken out all the money and are now throwing all the sewage in the rivers and the sea. Highest mortgages for years. Taxes are going up. Tax the highest ever, and the highest national debt. It's the most corrupt government we've ever had. He delivered that. Delivered councils going bust now. They can't afford to make ends meet. Food banks growing like mad. Many people, thousands and thousands of people depending upon food banks. Often you hear in cases of people not being able to afford to pay their children. Schools having to actually, raise charity to pay for food for children. The NHS is collapsing. It's one of his pledges, isn't it? Get the NHS waiting list down. They're the highest ever, aren't they? 7.8 million. And as far as the economy is concerned, we have to pay out hundreds of millions, even billions, to persuade people like BMW to stay in the UK and to persuade Tata to stay in South Wales. They don't want to come here otherwise. Nobody's going to come. No business in their right mind is going to come and set up in the UK. What else has he delivered? Vodafone, Amazon, Shell, Google, the Daily Mail, I've mentioned before. None of them pays any tax here, or hardly any tax. Starbucks, we all know all about it. Hardly any tax. The whole economy is just collapsing. GDP last month, it was said, was fell by 0.5%. I know you can never be absolutely sure about monthly figures, but as soon as this was announced that it had fallen, there had to be a reason, and the reason was given. It was everybody accepted it. It was repeated all everywhere all on the radio and television and the newspapers all repeated it. It was because of rain. It rained in July, so therefore, GDP naturally collapsed. How do they manage in countries where it rains a lot? I mean, their GDP must be on the floor, mustn't it? Do you remember that business with the tomatoes earlier in the year, back in spring? Couldn't get any tomatoes because there were shortages, but we were told it was because of rain in Spain. They're all grown under plastic. And that was it. I tweeted about this, and said about how we hadn't got any tomatoes and so on, and I got in response dozens of photographs from supermarkets all over almost every country in the EU showing piles and piles and piles and piles of fresh tomatoes. The answer was that food producers in the EU, tomato producers, if there was a slight shortage, they're going to say, well, the people we're not going to supply are the most difficult market. The market that's always a hassle, where we send the lorry and the lorry might be held up for a week where the lorry driver doesn't want to go anyway, where it's so much hassle. And this is before we bring in import controls. No, they supply all over Europe, where there's no paperwork and it's easy. But we've always got an excuse, isn't it? And this is the thing with Sunak. He gets up, tells us all the time everything's doing so well. We're doing so well, better this and better that, and better than France and better than Germany and better than Zimbabwe. Everything is better than everywhere else. And then he'll say it'd be worse under Labour. It's always it will be worse under Labour. That prisoner that escaped last week, or week before, the response was not to say, well, yeah, okay, it's a very, very rare occurrence, and we have to look at. No, more people escaped under Labour. More people escaped, so it's not so bad, really. And so we're approaching next year an election, and it seems to me. I mean, I've started to think for the first time that maybe it isn't going to go to the autumn before we have an election, because things are so bad now. I think Sunak's lost all support. He's not popular in the country. He's not popular anywhere. And we saw as an example, really, of our diminished status in the world, his visit to India. Now, he thought, being an Indian going to India, he was going to be welcomed with open arms and there was going to be a red carpet and all the rest of it. Turned up at the G20 conference, and I mean, really, there's a picture. You may have seen it, him stood there, nobody really talking to him. Modi was supposed to have a meeting with him on the Friday afternoon. He was supposed to in his house or his office or whatever, and Modi cancelled it. I think apparently Sunak and his wife ate alone on Friday evening whilst Modi was entertaining Joe Biden. Next day at the conference, somewhere sort of behind the set, Modi and Sunak had a little chat, and Sunak came all beaming afterwards, saying about a fantastic talk with him. It came out no deal with India. And not only that, India and Saudi Arabia and Israel and the whole of the EU have agreed on this fantastic new rail link right across those territories to match or to compete with the Chinese belt and braces, and we weren't involved because we don't matter anymore. We're just a rather awkward, deluded little island off Europe. And so, as I say, the election is coming up. Sunak's very unpopular. They're already, I think it's something like 37 Tory MPs have said they're not going to stand again. I think they all feel now that they're probably going to lose, and they feel free to criticise Sunak as much as they want. And he's going to find it, I think, very, very difficult. And I suspect he may well, I mean, I'm quite sure that he and most Tory MPs just can't wait for the nightmare to be over. But this is all down to Brexit. I mean, our situation is so much as a consequence of Brexit. And what have we got? We've got freedoms to dump our sewage in the rivers, to diverge, isn't it? And you know, since we left 2 years ago, we failed to ban 36 pesticides, which the EU have banned, 12 of them carcinogens. So anyone using those pesticides, which they're free to do in the UK, won't be able to export to the EU. And I would have thought, logically, that the EU would ban all exports of food to the EU, because they may contain these pesticides which we are allowing farmers to use, including 12 carcinogens, and they're all banned in the EU. Take back control, you see. Free to do deals with countries all over the world, like the Australia-New Zealand deal. That was where they're both laughing at us for concluding such poor deals. It's just pathetic. It's a hopeless mess, and I think there are three. I'll finish with this. There are three things I think we should seriously be very worried about. I've mentioned many times before about food shortages. You know, if there are, because of climate change and floods and too hot weather where plants have not grown and so on, if there are shortages, as with the tomatoes back in the spring, the EU will not be exporting to the UK. We will be the absolute back of the queue, to coin a phrase. And not only that, at some stage we have to bring in import controls. When that happens, I suspect that the Tories are waiting. As I said before, I think that the Tories are probably waiting till after the next general election, so it'll be Labour's problem. But once we have import controls, I think a huge proportion of EU food exporters are not going to export to the UK unless it's at very, very high prices. So we're going to have food shortages and almost certainly food price increases. Second thing I think we should be worried about is mental health, because I think there are so many people all over the world who are really, really going to be very, very stressed at the present situation. Poor people are really, really struggling. People who can't afford to buy children's clothes, can't afford to feed the children, can't afford to heat the houses or pay the mortgage. A lot of people can't cope with those sort of problems, and we don't have the people in the NHS to deal with present problems, leave alone any increasing problems of mental health. And finally, I think we should also be very concerned about crime, because I heard the chair of John Lewis on the radio only last week saying how in John Lewis, which is after all upmarket, quite nice shops, they've got a fantastic problem with shoplifting. It's almost out of control, and we're hearing this more and more all over the place. And despite the idiotic Braverman saying that in future police will investigate all cases, the police haven't got the resources. And if there is an outbreak of crime, I mean, there's nothing to stop it. There's very little deterrence because you're unlikely to be caught. Right now, if you commit a crime, you've got a 5% chance of going to court. And for people who are desperate, and people particularly when they see all these rich people I talked about at the beginning flaunting their wealth, constantly flaunting their wealth, and you see the way politicians are behaving, people are going to be very angry. And I think if you've got no other alternative, then crime's so easy, isn't it? Yeah, a bit of mugging, a bit of burglary, a bit of shoplifting. It's very, very easy, and I think you could very easily slip into a state whereby that becomes the norm. That just we're no longer safe. It's frightening. It's terrifying. But if it all comes back to if you squeeze people enough, there are going to be consequences. And I think it's really desperate. I mean, I don't think this government should ever be forgiven for. I mean, it all goes back to Johnson really, but for what is happening and the fact they're still defending Brexit. And the depressing thing, of course, is that we have a Labour opposition who are likely to be the government next time, who is keen to make Brexit work, and they're going to solve the immigration problem, according to Keir Starmer, by going after the people smugglers. It's just like you solve the drugs problem by going after the drug barons. Easy peasy. Just find out where they are. Don't know how you do that. Find out who they are. Don't know how you do that. Yeah, I think this idea. I'm sorry, just to finish with this idea that you go over to Calais and catch the people smugglers. People smugglers. They're living in Knightsbridge. They're living in Mayfair. They're living in Dubai. They're living in Istanbul. They're miles away. They're 20 people between the people who are really profiting out of all this and the people who are actually putting people in boats on the beach at Calais. Going after the people is not going to solve anything. It's just so naive. But anyway, sorry, I'm just going on a bit too much. So I'll leave it there. If you watched this far, thank you very much indeed. Please go and have a look at my hats, ml44.com. And, until next week. I hope I haven't depressed you too much, but until next week, bye for now.